Excuse me. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the City Commission Workshop, Budget Workshop, combined meeting with the City Commission and the Budget Advisory Board. I want to thank you all for being here today, and hopefully we can get some good stuff accomplished today. I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll of the commission.
Vice Mayor Moritas,
Here.
Commissioner Glassman,
Here.
Commissioner McKenzie, Commissioner Sorensen,
Here.
Mayor Trentalis.
Here. And Mr. Donaldson, can you please call the roll of your committee? Do you remember who they are?
Hang on one sec.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Vice Chair Lowe, Johnny Smith, Abidemi Apalapo, Catherine Graham, Adam Sabin, Ross Camerata, Michael Marshall, Prabhulim Patel, Christopher Williams, and Chair Donaldson here. We have
Great.
7 people here today.
Okay, do you have a quorum?
Yes, thank you.
It's not so much that we're going to vote on anything this morning, but it's good to have you all here. And once again, I want to thank each and every member of the advisory board for the service that you are performing on behalf of this community. It's very, very helpful to our city staff, our city manager, and certainly the city commission. So with having said that, I'd like to turn the mic over to the chair, Mr. Brian Donaldson.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners. I think the first thing that we're going to start with this meeting is I'm going to save my comments to after the city manager makes a presentation, and we also have a presentation from Stantec. So that way we all have the same information in front of us through the presentation. As you know, that in this meeting, there's only 3 things that we needed to accomplish. And those will be easily accomplished today, which is setting the numbers for the trim notice, which you will be tasked with next month at your, I believe it's July 6th meeting. So we will weigh in on those 3 items today, and then we will be meeting again with you in August, where we'll be going over more of the details of the budget. So with that, I would like to introduce the city manager, Chris Lagerblum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor Commission, quickly do a presentation on the preliminary budget today. Many of you, we've had this presentation one-on-one already, and really nothing has changed since those presentations were made. So I'll keep it fairly brief, but thorough enough that you and the public know what is being proposed in the budget. Mr. Donaldson is correct that today we're really looking at direction on where to set the maximum millage rate in July. This budget, we'll get into the minutia of it really in August and September when you're back from your summer break. So today, we can certainly dive into as much detail as you want, but really today what we're looking for is just that you have some comfort giving us direction on setting the maximum millage rate for 2022. Spoiler alert, I guess I'll start with the end in mind. After we make the budget presentation, the recommendation I'll have for you is that the millage rate remain steady at a maximum millage of 4.1193. So that's the spoiler alert.
Meeting adjourned. No, just kidding.
for this morning, but let me walk you through some of the things that are in the preliminary budget. The biggest thing this year that's different than the normal years is the influx of CARES funds and the, I want to make sure I term it correctly, the American Rescue Plan Act funds into this budget. Since the beginning of COVID, we as a city have been in receipt of just over $49 million worth of COVID CARES funds from an assortment of places, and they've been distributed in an assortment of ways. But what really is at play in this budget is the bringing in of funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, $19.1 million in this fiscal year, and the anticipation of $19.1-ish million in the 2023 budget. What we did in this proposed budget is we took those dollars and applied a formula, and those funds that were able to be used as a revenue replacement were used in that manner, and we brought forward one-time capital type projects in the preliminary budget that we would do in 2022 that were already in our CIP. We just expedited, moved them up in the CIP so that we could accomplish them quicker. The biggest one and the most notable one is the repair and replacement of seawalls at $5.8 million in the 2022
So
budget.
let me just interrupt you for a
Sure.
moment. So the two sources of federal funding that you spoke of have not really been necessary in order to shore up our operating budget. These are you're just moving some CIP projects forward, which would not otherwise have been moved forward but for the federal funds. So we had sufficient funds in order to operate based on current income levels.
We did. And if we needed to balance the budget and I needed to present one to you without the influx of
Federal funds.
we could have done that. And we could have done that and maintained the reserve that we've built. So we're coming out of the COVID pandemic as financially sound as we went into it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem at all. Just going through the other capital projects that are moving forward or that are recommended to move forward in this 2022 budget. I mentioned the restoration and replacement of seawalls. 3.9 million is being recommended to partner with the dollars that remain in the fire bond to once and for all finally close that out and construct Station 13 in Birch State Park out on Sunrise Boulevard. 3.5 million for bridge repairs and replacements. We, as you know, there's places in our city that bridges are just nearing their end of life and need to be replaced. And so an emphasis and a focus needs to be placed upon that.
Chris,
as we
what's
go forward.
what's that for the Birch State Park Station? What's your estimated kind of timeline just generally?
So the site is being ready to assemble the temporary station on the Natchez site. That's been quite a process to get through permitting and design. We anticipate that will happen over the summer to this fall. And then we will move forward as quickly as we can with the Station 13 design. We have conceptually what it looks like on that site. And we'll obviously have to take that through construction drawings and construction permitting and then move it forward. So I would say we're under construction at some point next year, next calendar year.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Continuing on, 3.3 million towards beach nourishment. That's something that we've been kicking that can down the road. We do have to fund that by contract. And so this budget contemplates that. 2.5 million in repair and replacement sidewalks and roadways. 2 million for city facility repairs and replacements. Hopefully not the police building or city hall, but other city facilities. $600,000 for the renovation of Parker Playhouse. That is not a final payment, but that is one of our obligations with Parker Playhouse. $300,000 for Las Olas Isle signalized crosswalks. This comes in the form of 2 crosswalks, about 1/3 of the distance down Las Olas Boulevard and 2/3 if you picture from 15th Avenue to the barrier island. And $200,000 for ADA compliant bus stops. When we moved away from the wave and ride program with the Sun Trolley, we now have fixed stops, and the fixed stops have to be ADA compliant. So that's the reason for that. In the budget packet that I presented to you, there's some summary pages that talk about the increase in revenues and the increase in expenditures. This budget largely was balanced with the bringing forward of capital projects with the American Rescue Plan Act money. So there's not a lot of balancing strategies in this budget that we talked about last year, where we were creating different departments and different project funds, et cetera, last year. This one really, this is not the type of budget that you would hope that I would bring forward to you in any year other than a year that we have the influx of funds that we do, because it does on its face look like expenditures are outpacing revenues, and that delta, that gap is closed because of the ACT funds that we're receiving.
Is there a deadline by which time we have to spend that federal money? In other words, could we have carried over some of this money to a future budget? Or does that have to be spent within a certain time frame? Do we know the answer?
4
to
years,
that?
Laura's, yeah. So Laura's saying 4 years.
Okay, thank you.
Continuing in the packet, you'll see a attachment that talks about strategic enhancements and balancing strategies. These were the projects and new initiatives that the staff brought forward this year to enhance the budget. As you read that, and if you read it from right to left, the 3 columns on the right are the ones really to pay attention to, where it talks about a year 1 cost, a year 2 cost, but most importantly, in the FY 2022 preliminary budget column, which is the furthest to the right, if that column has a number in it, that means it is suggested for funding in this fiscal 2022 budget. If it does not have a number in the column, that means that the item was proposed by the staff, but is not part of my recommended budget, preliminary budget to the commission this year. So everything that has a number in it is included in this balanced budget. Everything that does not, does not. I'll highlight one thing that is the Real-Time Crime Center civilian personnel. You don't see a number in that column, but you should see an asterisk that would point you to the end of the document that says that we're going to utilize some vacant positions that we currently have already on our personnel complement to reclassify to be able to staff that Real-Time Crime Center. But I don't believe we need to establish new positions for it. 4. Yes, sir. As you look through this and study it going forward, the first page, front and back, or 2 pages if you printed one-sided, is all the funds that are is all general fund, and the second 2 pages would be all other funds. So when you look at those, you can get some sense as to where those requests are. Our budget office did a really nice 2-page attachment 3 is what it's labeled. This will give you some idea if you have questions as to where the CARES dollars have come from and where they've been allocated to. This is a quick snapshot that will highlight all of those different places that the CARES funds came into the city COVID funds and where they went out to. Similarly, there's a American Rescue Plan Act summary, 2 pages labeled as attachment 4. This gives you some idea as to how we can spend that money and the formula by which we use to determine what could be used as revenue replacement and what had some more stringent control to it. It's a good summary of how that how those funds have been recommended for use. With the budget, also you'll have the commission priorities and how they line up with the different items that are funded in this preliminary budget. This was a good, we started this, I think, a couple of years ago, and it's a really good document, I think, because it shows that we take the commission's priorities and actually assign dollars to them, that we are mindful of what your priorities are and build a budget around those. So that's a good summary for your high and priority projects and other commission priorities. I won't spend a lot of time on the different replacement plans that we include with the budget, but we do. This is just an indication that we think towards the future and that we don't just budget in a vacuum 1 year at a time. We have quite an extensive fleet, and when you have an extensive fleet, it's appropriate to have a replacement plan. That's included through 2026 in the budget packet that you have. Goes vehicle by vehicle and assigns when we believe that it's depreciated to the point that it will need to be replaced. Every year we do a personal computer replacement plan, and so you can see that is carried forward again this year as to which of our computers are at end of life and what needs to be replaced. We have an animal replacement plan and a bulletproof vest replacement plan. Obviously police dogs and police horses, as well as bulletproof vests that need to be replaced because they do expire. Working through attachment 9 is information technology and IT upgrade plan. This year stands out a bit because there is a fairly significant UPS replacement project that would be underway in 2022 that is not carried through 23 to 26. So if you look at the bottom line, that's why you'll see that there's a difference. Move then to a police department equipment replacement plan. This deals with some technical services requirements of the dive team and the Marine unit. So you can get an idea of when we will be replacing the Marine Patrol, their boats. And something that's been talked a lot about with the commission, and I think you're supportive of it, is in our crime fighting strategies, we have a fairly significant license plate reader program, and we do want to be able to expand that. So you'll see 2 different things here. One is that we have the replacement dollars to keep the project going, and then if you look at the new initiatives sheet, that was the one that talks about priorities, you'll see that we also fund a expansion plan, or propose to fund an expansion plan in the LPR program. Finally, there's a fire rescue equipment replacement plan. This deals with their items that we know have certain requirements and needs over time. This deals with stretchers, SCBAs, Lucas devices, Life Pack 15s, and it'll give you some sense as to what the fire department has as a replacement plan. And finally, well, not quite finally yet, but close to finally, there's the 5-year CIP included in the budget. You'll see some things in that, some highlights to look out for, is if you see items cross through, what that means is those were items that were in our CIP that we've been able to move forward in the getting it done phase. So there was dollars for seawall replacement going forward, not nearly at the tune of $5.8 million. But if you see that the seawall replacement line has been lined through, it's because it's been brought forward and funded or proposed to be funded in 2022 rather than funding it out over sequential years. Also keep your attention then to year 2026. Every time we build a 5-year CIP, we add a year, and that's where funds are competed for new projects is in year 6, which will become year 5 of the adopted new budget. Beyond that, there's the ever popular nonprofit grant funding recommendations, and really put those in 2 different columns. We've got them either as either in the operating budget or as a nonprofit grant. So for nonprofit grant, the Budget Advisory Board spent a tremendous amount of time studying and evaluating and rating these different proposals that came in for funding, and everything that the Budget Advisory Board recommended is included in the balanced budget that's presented to you today. I took the liberty to add a couple things that I think that the commission was telling me that they wanted to have added, and we'll certainly need to hear that today if I got those right or not. But in the nonprofit grant funding recommendations, I will be recommending, which is a slight change from the budget that's presented to you because of some information I got from the mayor yesterday. But Nova Southeastern Art Museum in the amount of $250,000, and the Museum of Discovery and Science for their STEM project, influencing kids in our city, $214,800. In the not-for-profit organizations included in our operating budget, which basically means that we give money and we get something in return, as opposed to the first list, which is we give money towards somebody else's program. So in the category of giving money to get something in return, everything that was recommended from the Budget Advisory Board remains in the proposed budget, as well as recommended funding for the Historical Society in the amount of $85,000, Winterfest in the amount of $75,000, and the Stranahan House in the amount of $100,000. This puts our budget right at about $900 million, all funds. We got better news when we got the real information from the property appraiser. He came and he was excited when he gave us the news initially. That news happened to come in even better when we got the real numbers. We do see an increase. A lot of it's attributed to new construction. There was a $1.3 billion worth of new construction added to our tax roll, which made the increase year over year about $9.9 million. And we had estimated about 5.1, 5.2. So that was additional decent information that came from the property appraiser. I'll stop there and see if you have any questions, or see if the chair wishes to hear from Stan Tech and then engage with the commission.
I think I'd rather have the presentation from Stan Tech, so that way we have all the information in front of us before we start going into.
You okay with that, Mayor? Is that
all right?
Sorry, yeah,
work?
absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'd like to introduce to you our partners, Stantec. We work with them each year to look at what we're proposing in the current year budget and then to model it for the next 10 years. And that's really important because we don't want to be making our decisions in a vacuum. So we're modeling this year's budget, fiscal year 22 budget, and adding all of the replacement plans, all of our planned capital and other needs. And we've worked with them to present this information. I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Stevens and Jacob Silence, who will walk you through the models for our primary funds.
Perfect.
Good morning, commissioners and members of the BAB. What I'd like to do is walk through, we've got kind of a hybrid presentation. So I've got some slides. We've also got the analytical models here. And what I'd like to do is run through the accumulation of work that's gone into this over the last few months. So we've worked really closely with budget staff, finance, and had wonderful work sessions with the subject matter experts and department heads so that we could get all of the relevant information, not only, as Laura mentioned, for the 2022 budget, for all of those years going forward. And so we've built models that capture a 10-year outlook from today forward. That will capture a number of funds. So we have the general fund, airport, building, parking, regional sewer, water and sewer, and stormwater and sanitation. So what this really fundamentally represents is the different accounting compartmentalization within the city. And you're tracking revenues and expenditures separately for each of these funds. So we'll look at them all independently. Now, there are a couple key data sources and assumptions that go into each of these models. This first slide covers all of the funds that we looked at. So we've got the 2020 audited financials as our starting point. We've got the 21 amended budget, the preliminary 22 budget within the models. We've also updated our community investment plan to capture fiscal years 22 through the 26 preliminary plan. We've also got our estimates right now for fiscal year 21, and we've been updating that over the last few months to try to project and estimate how the year is going to close out. We also, as we update each year, take into account historical trends, looking back over the last 5-10 years, how revenues and expenditures have evolved over time. There was some new pension estimating software, which did provide some additional information this year to help us forecast those expenses into the future. We've also put a placeholder in for the joint governmental facility. For all of the funds, that represents about $16.4 million. And right now we've got that beginning in fiscal year 2026. Doesn't include the renewal and replacement though. One other item, there is an insurance fund replenishment for 2021 through fiscal year 2023 of roughly $6 million per year. Now, from an objective standpoint, why do we do this? And there's really, in my mind, two really key considerations. So one is when you're doing your budget process, we want to understand any future year impacts of that. So in a way, we're really playing forward your current assumptions in order to look at the future and anticipate any challenges that we may have in the future. Secondly, it also allows us to take into account different decisions that you may have today and how that may lead to different futures within each one of these enterprise funds and special funds that we look at. Additionally, allows for any sensitivity tests or scenarios that we may want to look at. And a true up of prior year assumptions as we do this from year to year. I want to see our assumptions, test those from the last few years and see how things have changed over time. And that's, I think, very pertinent this year. So what I'll do is next is jump into the general fund. And there are a number of key observations that are centric to this particular one, and I'll run through them real quickly before we switch over to the model. And so first of all, we've got the fire assessment, which is a key revenue of the general fund. We've currently got that programmed in for a true up to full cost recovery every 3 years. The next one would be in fiscal year 2023 to ensure that's covering the full cost that the assessment can. We then have a number of community redevelopment areas. And the Northwest Progresso will sunset in fiscal year 26. And with that, we will see a reduction in the transfer from the general fund, which is currently about $6 million. That'll disappear at that time period. But we do expect some additional expenses. We programmed in $350,000 in increased operating expenditures for the general fund. City's annual required pension contributions. So one assumption going forward.
Wait, could you back up?
Yes.
How do you attribute the $350,000 operating expense? Is that during the next 5 years?
So what we have done is when that CRA sunsets in 2026
Right.
and the city takes it over, we've anticipated there will be some additional costs that you would have in the O&M budget. And so that's what that $350,000.
Doesn't the money come to the city? Doesn't our portion of the CRA money, the tax increment, just come back to the city anyway to cover this?
Well, so at this point, this would be sunsetted. So CRA would be gone. And it's our understanding that you would have likely some additional expenditures. That would
I
be
get that, but while the tax increment program will be sunsetted, the tax money is still going to go somewhere.
Yes.
The county gets theirs, the school board gets theirs, and the city gets theirs.
Yes.
So would this not be a wash?
You're absolutely correct. So the $6 million currently that you're transferring will now stay within the general fund. And then we're just noting that we would add some additional expenditures of 350,000. But you are correct. There will be a wash there. Mhm.
So it would be about a 5.6, the net difference.
The net.
The net.
Because we're gaining 6 million, but then we're going to have an expenditure that we wouldn't have. So it's different columns. So when they're looking at the spreadsheets and when they're doing the statistics, that's why they're noting that, because we'll have a revenue increase of 6 million that isn't going out to the CRA now. But then we'll be responsible for those out of the current fund, which aren't currently in the expenses.
Is the 6 million the city's portion?
Yes.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, we're currently taking from the budget, putting 6 million into that one CRA.
John, did you want to say something about that?
So no, that's just recognizing that we have certain expenses that are in the CRA now, which we are going to have to pick up.
Right.
And that's just that small portion. So that balance of it. We may also have some additional expenses associated with maintenance of some of the capital improvement work that we've done, similar to what we've done at the beach. So for example, all the lights and improvements we did along Sistrunk. So I would anticipate, and I don't know if that's built into this 350,000 or not, but we've done a lot of work in the corridor over there. And again, just like with the beach, we'll probably have some additional maintenance costs that the city will have to assume going forward.
And I understand that, but I just wanted to make sure the public knew that it wasn't just going to be a hit of 350 every year, because it will be set off against the tax increment that
The revenue that we're no longer contributing over, correct?
Correct.
Hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great point.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's a great point.
Thank you.
And then the the next assumption would be a new fire station, which is Fire Station 88. We have that included in fiscal year 2024 for staffing. That's currently estimated at $1 million.
If you wonder what that is, that's what we've referred to as an EMS substation. Fire Station 88, so that's the staffing for,
Where is that?
it would be located on the piece of property that we bought just west of US 1, south of the tunnel.
Right.
Perfect. Within the general fund, the joint governmental portion that would be attributable to the general fund would be 9.9 million. As I mentioned a second ago, we've added that in fiscal year 2026 as a placeholder. Fiscal year 2022 taxable value, I'll talk about that in a second when we bounce over to the model, but one of your larger revenue streams is the ad valorem. Currently, we've seen an increase of about 7% over the 2020 roll with the final valuation that's come in. And then COVID budget impacts. One of the things we noted as we worked with staff in the city last year, you made a number of very quick reactions and financial changes as the pandemic came in. As we then pick up the analysis this year, that really put you in a good spot. Some of those changes provided a lot more financial flexibility. And so you came out, I think the city manager mentioned, kind of unscathed, in a very similar financial position as you came into. This next graphic, and I know this is really small up on the screen, but what we've done here is I just wanted to give you a vantage point into how other communities are trending with regards to millage rates. And so this shows for all of the communities that are assessing a millage within Broward County, the change in that millage over time. And they are ordered from the most change at the top to the least change at the bottom. And I'll just walk through. As you can see in 2007, a red arrow denotes the millage rate had gone down in that year, and the black denotes the millage rate has gone up. And so in 2007, you can see kind of the reaction to really large increasing property values. Many communities were decreasing that millage. But as the Great Recession came in 2008, 2009, we see a lot more black arrows where communities were responding to now decreases in property values by increasing their millage. And then as we get out into the mid 2010s, it gets more of a mixed pictures as communities update that millage with their budget with either an increase or a decrease. One thing I will note, Fort Lauderdale's been at the bottom. So you've been in the kind of unique position of all of your peers to hold the millage rate flat through all of this time. The average change over that time for the communities on here is about a 36% increase from 2007. So with that, I'll switch over. Jacob, if you want to pull up the model, we'll take a look at the general fund and I'll show you some scenarios we've been evaluating.
Good job, gentlemen. Good job.
Okay, now up on your screen is the analytical tool that we use for each one of your models. This is the general fund. So I'll just highlight a couple portions and then we can run some scenarios. Up at the very top is the millage rate, and that shows the millage rate in each and every year. And we can make adjustments to that, changes to that millage in each year. In this current scenario, you're noticing it's flat throughout the projection period. Right below that is the key assumption with regards to taxable value increase. And in fiscal year 21 and 22, we're showing kind of the actual change that's projected. So 6.3% on 21, 6.07% in fiscal year 22. And that accounts for two different dynamics, right? You've got some existing price increases on real estate, but then also in your particular community, you've got a lot of new additions to the tax roll, which has been one of the key drivers to the larger increases over that in the near term. Now, going down a little bit.
Out of curiosity, what did you project 2021 to be the last time you presented this to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we always run a little bit of scenarios here to see what would be lower increases. How would that affect your general fund? Last year, we were running with a 5% increase. That's been one of our planning numbers going forward. I'll show you what that looks like in a second as I update this, but that was our update. So what we've seen actually in the trend over that is it's been coming down a little bit. The year before it was a little over 7%. And so it's been 6.36% now. The next assumption, as I mentioned, is or we can say right there, the cash flow, Jacob. That's perfect. So in this current view, it shows the budget right now without the addition of the American Rescue Plan Act. And what that would show is without that money in the advancing capital, there would actually be a deficit of $16 million. If we go down, one of the other key assumptions was.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was mentioned in the city manager's comments that the American Rescue Plan dollars are being used really prudently to fund capital, right? One-time expenditures. You wouldn't want to fund those with ongoing. As I've shown the model diagnostically, and I'll add them in a second, those monies aren't accounted for. So I'll show you what they do, but without those monies, you would show a deficit right now.
We would show a deficit.
Yes,
Okay.
But those monies substantially help balance the budget and allow you to do that capital funding this year. So just scrolling down, I want to just orient you to a couple of these graphics. And this model works very simple, just like a household budget. And so off to the right, we've got revenues versus expenditures. The orange bar is the cash coming out, the expenditures. The black bar is the cash coming in. So if we're spending more than we're taking in, we've got to pull from fund balance. And that's shown over to the left with the year-end fund balances. We're trying to manage those between about 3 months to 2 months. That's the orange bar on the high side and the black bar on the bottom. What you can see is in this plan over time, those balances are declining in each year. And actually by 2027, we would show them going out now. We'll work through some scenarios, how we get that back up. But the reason for that is I'll draw your attention to the graphic in the bottom right-hand corner. And what this shows is the largest expenditure versus the change in the largest revenue. And so we've got salaries and benefits in orange and the incremental change there in each year that we're experiencing within the general fund. And in black, that's the additional revenue from ad valorem. And so the gap between those two, you can see, is that the salaries and benefits are outpacing the growth in ad valorem revenue in this current scenario. So a couple different things we can look at. If you want to bring the last plan real quick, Jacob, what I'll have him do is put two bars next to each other, one that'll be green and one that will be blue. The green one's going to stay just as it is. So every time I make a change, we can compare back to that to see the effect. So the first thing I'd like you to update is on the property value change. Right now, we've got a scenario we were projecting a little bit lower, testing the sensitivity of what happens if the values came in a little bit lower year to year. What I'd like to do is go back to the 5% planning number, especially with the update from the property appraiser and 6% in 22. It feels appropriate to bring that up back to a little bit of a higher level going forward. And just ground truth, and there's a lot of activity going on the ground right now. So if we bring that in, what that will do is you can now see the blue bars have come up a bit from where we were on the green bars, but that changed up to 5% is not necessarily going to solve things on its own. Next, what I'd like to do is in 2022, Jacob, let's bring in the American Rescue Plan dollars. So the first thing we'll do here is fix the 2022 budget, bring in those one-time resources, which allow us to fund our capital in that year. And so What Jacob's now done is brought in that American Rescue Plan dollars. And that's had a very substantial impact in the near term, right? It balances in fiscal year 2022, the revenues with expenditures. But one of the really key items there is that's not an ongoing source of revenue. And so you can see the overall trend and the slope of the curves for the end of year fund balances are very, very similar going forward, a little bit higher. But what this would show is with that black bar being our minimum we want to hold, by 2026, we would be below the minimum reserves we would want in fund balance. So another solution to come in here would be a potential adjustment to the millage rate. So Jacob, if you would come in and unclear this, in 2023, we can test what amount of a change in the millage rate we would need in order to start to balance the equation for the next 10 years. And so Jacob, if you bring in 0.25 mils, let's bring that in. And what that will do in 2023 is, keeping all of the other assumptions the same, increase the millage rate by 2.5 mils up to 4.393. What that shows now down on the end of year fund balances is that will now bring us out a little bit further within the projection period at a sustainable level of fund balances. So now those blue bars in 2027, they're above the black bar where they were below a minute ago. But what you'll see in the long term at the end of that is it starts to trail off again. So as you increase that revenue, if the projections and historical trends continue where you've got salaries and benefits increasing faster than that underlying property growth, those two curves will catch up again in the future, and we'll see that go down. So there's two other ways to look at this. You could potentially do a little bit higher in 2023. So instead of 0.25, if Jacob updates that and puts another 0.25 to bring it up to a $0.5 mil in total, we can look at that scenario. And what that would do is bring those bars up a little bit further. And so in that case, what you've done is up front, a little bit of a larger millage, but it buys you throughout the next 10 years with these projections, balances throughout the period that would be now sustainable. And your revenues and expenditures, and the chart to the right, you can see the black line and the orange line are pretty much on top of one another. And that's the real hallmark when we look at this of sustainability. Your revenues are matching your expenditures in each and every year. So I know that's a lot of talk. Is there any questions on this or any other scenarios you'd like me to plug in? I'm happy to plug in anything that you have on your mind as we've gone through that. But the key dynamics we see is sometime in the near future, if millage is at the same level and you have the same service levels, we would expect to see fund balances decline without an adjustment to the millage at some point in the future.
Could I just like to play with the model a little bit? Could you keep the millage, I guess, first draft, keep the millage at 0.5, $0.5 mil, drop down the taxable value, just say like go for starting in 23, go like 3%.
Do you want to keep 3% each year after that?
Sure. I just want to see. Please, thanks.
So yeah, so what that would show with that update is you would be sustainable for call it 3/4 of the projection period. But as we get into 2026, 27, we would start to show a decline where your expenditures are above your revenues, and then fund balance would decline after that.
What's historically, when you go back like 10 years or so, is the average increase of 5%?
It's been a bit higher in the near term. So you've had a lot of additional additions to the tax or to your taxable value from new growth.
Mhm.
And so I would say on average, it's been, in the 7s, 8%. What we've seen though, is that curve's been bending a little bit and it's been coming down. And so that's where we got the 5% projecting forward as just a baseline, as a good planning number. We don't want to oversell that amount and then be short if it doesn't want to come in. So that's what we're keeping in the back of our mind.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So basically, and I'm just trying to understand it.
Sure.
We've held our millage rate for all these years. But as you have indicated with the blue, the green and black bars, we stayed at that rate. There will be a declining of our fund balance, and we'd have to increase the millage rate to recover what we didn't do all those years. It sounds good that we didn't do it. But what concerns me the most is I think Commissioner Sorensen kind of hit it when he looked at the taxable value, which we all pride ourselves on how much our homes are valued at. But in this market, it's a cash market, so you can get way more than it's worth. But if you went to the bank to borrow money, you get nothing. So we got a lot of homes that are upside down in this wonderful financial cash demand market. So when I look at the numbers, I really don't see, all this future growth or health as we see it now. And we know that every 10 years, things shift in the market. And what it tends to do is we run into inflation and what have you. And I think we just change presidents. And that's often a big indicator if you go way, way down or way, way up, depending on how we adjust certain factors in the market. So I don't see a bright future based on what I'm looking at, because I look beyond the wrath and the tears. I look into the weeds or into the forest. I think Commissioner Sorensen really hit it when he used that indicator. So in your professional opinion, what would you recommend we do now to stay ahead of this slippery slope trending in the wrong direction?
So I think your observations are dead on. What we've seen over time is your property value's grown really substantially, right? And that's been the big additions to your revenue, which has allowed you to maintain your millage rate for a number of years flat going forward. What we're showing currently at your given service levels, projecting that forward and recognizing the fact that the expenditures too have been inflating, right? And you mentioned that inflation has been a key driver here, especially salaries and benefits being the largest component of your expenditure.
Right.
That continues forward and you want to maintain that service level, then likely you have to do some kind of adjustment on the revenue side. And you're really limited on the levers, right? You've only got a few levers, millage being the one that you have a lot of local control over. And so that's why we've shown that solution going forward, a potential increase in order to solve that equation. So in our opinion, it does seem at some point it will be warranted that an increase in the millage rate will be needed in order to ensure that you have sufficient revenues.
Right, because what I see is our taxable value is what has sustained us, not holding the millage rate that we brag about quite often. But I'm a realist, and I see Brian's eyebrows are raising as tall as mine do when I'm expressing myself. But this is the time that we need to throw this out to the public, as the mayor has indicated. When he referenced CRA dollars and, the taxpayers need to know this, I think at this time we need to have a real discussion about these numbers, because we really tout this number. And that number has never, in my opinion, been a real number. It's just been a glorified ride of a financial market.
Commissioner, if I could follow up on that, this is our, I think, third year that I've sat here and addressed you at this point of the year as chair. In the last 2 years, you asked me, Chair, when do you think we're going to need an ad valorem increase? So it's the same follow-up that we've had in previous conversations. And last year I said, I didn't know if this was the fiscal year. The only reason why BAB has voted to maintain the ad valorem flat this year, with a precursor that I'll go into my other conversation about the future, is the fact that we were able to get an additional $4.5 million in the $1.3 billion new construction that we had not anticipated earlier in the line, and the federal money. So the fact that our revenues are under our contractual obligations and we have a shortfall, then in the past, if you do not want to increase the ad valorem, you're then shortchanging other things in your general fund in order to make those obligations. So in the past, perhaps looked at CIPs and done other things to shift around. So we have in our remarks that I'll be closing with after the Stantec, address your point about the future and our concerns about the future, and that we need to be more open to that. We have done a great job as a city in making sure that we're giving a great value to our residents. The fact that the county has trended at 30% increase since 2007, and we have maintained, but we have been very fiscally responsible, and we're more diversified than some of the other cities with our other balances of our funds versus our general fund. But if you ask me, do we make 16 years? I highly doubt it.
And the reason why I bring it, to the attention, because when we go out and talk to our constituents, that they're complaining about, how much they're actually paying in taxes. The millage rate is one thing, but all the other stuff that you just mentioned, and then the taxable value. I mean, you're seeing an increase every year that you're paying. I mean, I had a 8
But we're
years ago.
seeing the increases in the other
Right.
other billers. So when my neighborhood, I'm president of my neighborhood, when they complain about their tax bill, I then repoint them that only about 23.8% is city. The rest is county, schools, hospital, et cetera. So I'm sure that
And I do the same thing.
the property appraiser was very excited when he came to us.
He's very excited.
He got $1.3 billion.
He's very
because
excited, but I'm
the
very.
county and the schools and the hospital, that new construction within this one city
Mhm.
is about a $23 million tax bill.
Yeah, he
And
was
we took
excited.
4.5 of that.
But let me say this. I wasn't excited. I have more than one piece of property. And I have some properties that I purchased, on the lower end that are like small houses. And in the last 7 years, you think I have a house in Rio Vista, how that value has just increased. So no pun intended, increased in value, but I couldn't get that equity extracted if I wanted to sell that piece of the portfolio. So when I'm talking to my constituents or my residents, anybody in the city, I explain it just the way you explained it to me. But I think having this conversation helps the folks that are watching, and not everyone is as savvy as you all are with the numbers. But we have to carry the water each and every day and explain this at the end of the day. So this is why I'm bringing it out in a public discussion so that folks will understand how it works and that this looks good. But one thing in the market can really turn all this stuff around. And then we'll be back to 2007 and 2008, 2009, when we really saw some drastic changes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chris, Commissioner, Vice Mayor Moritas has been raising her hand, but I cannot see that on my screen.
Oh, hold on. I'm going to test it. Can you see it when I raise my hand?
I can't see any hand raised because
Nobody can see my hand raised on the
Make some
screen.
noise.
Okay,
Now-
well, I don't want to be rude and interrupt. So Mayor, I'll just text you if I'd like to be
That's fine.
recognized, if you
Go
don't mind.
that's fine, no problem. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And thank you. This question is for Stantec, actually. Thank you for modeling that. I just want to confirm that you were modeling about a 5% growth, even though our growth has been a little bit more recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. In the long term, we've been projecting with a 5% increase each year. Right now on the screen, it's a 3% because of the scenario we just ran, but our long-term projection is 5% from a planning perspective. It's been a little
Okay.
bit higher in the past.
And when you said 0.25 mils, was that a one-time or was that an annual increase of 0.25?
Great clarification. So it's a one-time in 2023 was the first scenario we ran, and then the second was a 0.5 one-time in 2023.
But when he says
wait.
one time, it doesn't mean it's just going to end in that way.
So it'll
It continues.
yeah, it'll increase the millage, and
Sustains.
that will sustain and apply toward taxable value in each year going forward.
Okay, because the millage rate was increased. Okay, so explain that again. You said 0.25 or did you say 0.5? I heard just two different numbers.
So we ran two different scenarios. The first
Okay.
one was 0.25. And that one would get you pretty close to sustainable throughout the period, but it would drop off in the last few years. So then what we did is we upped that to 0.5, and that would be sustainable for the next 10 years.
So 0.5 starting in what year?
So in fiscal,
2023?
yeah, in fiscal year 2023, the millage rate would increase from its 4.1193
Right.
to 0.6193.
Okay, or it might just go up 0.25, just depending on what the commission does. So we're looking at 2023, either 0.25 or 0.5, and that'll take us about another 10 years before we.
The 0.5 will. The 0.25, you would likely in the outer period experience a time where you would decline below your minimum balances and potentially need another increase.
Okay, so the 0.25 is probably half the amount of time. Okay, thank you for explaining that. Chris, I had one question. When you mentioned NSU, I heard 250, but I thought I read 500. What number is correct on the NSU line item for the nonprofit grants?
Yeah, so what's in the budget that was published was 500. Based upon information I got from the mayor yesterday, I think the number is more correctly 250, which is why that amendment will be made in the budget in subsequent publishings.
Okay, so we are changing that. So I read that correctly and I heard it correctly. So we are amending it. And that's 250 this year, and then we will see what we're doing next year.
I took it upon myself to work with some of the donors to the museum and to try to get them to increase their contributions. So we talked about doing matching funds. So if we gave 250, could they raise 250? And they were able to raise the extra 250.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that update. And then my one last comment that and thank you all, because I know we're wrapping up here in a couple of minutes. Thank you, Budget Advisory Board. This is excellent. Thank you for all the nonprofit stuff you did. It looks like we've met all of our goals, yours and ours. Chris, the 9.9 million for the Joint Government Center just made me think, since that is the projection for how much we will spend as a city for operating and maintenance, operations and maintenance. I would like to know, maybe not today, but maybe a little bit in the future, what are our current expenses from the city for operations and maintenance for all of the offices that will go to the Joint Government Center? I'm just trying to compare the two just to make sure we're getting a good deal. And I know that's just a projection from Stantec, so maybe that's not the actual number, but I've probably never asked that question, kind of what are our annual operating and maintenance costs for our city offices? So
Yeah, we certainly can provide that. Our finance department has that put together, so that we'll deliver to the entire commission
okay.
later today.
All right, thank you. I think that's it for right now. And I wanted to once again just say thank you to the entire Budget Advisory Board. I really appreciate you all, appreciate working with you, and thankful that we're in a good shape this year, and we'll see what happens next year.
Great. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other questions up to this point? No?
I did have some questions.
I just have one.
Is this a good time for us to do
No,
it?
I mean,
I'll wait. I'll wait till
Yeah.
the end. I'll wait till the end.
Yeah, okay. So the 0.5, by the way, that's a 12% tax increase, correct?
It is. Mhm. You-
That's,
you off the side.
I figured it out on my calculator.
How much is that calculated?
They don't trust me with much, but
12.1. Mhm.
12%, yeah, okay.
Must be a $6 calculator if you got it right. Those are the ones that work.
Could you rack and stack that with the municipalities on that graph, what that looks like?
Where your millage increase would be on that one. I believe if you go back there, I think it'd still be the lowest one on that list. We can pop it back up real quick. So the next one on the list is 5.9. So you'd still be the lowest one on the list.
Please proceed.
Sure. You go through. Okay, so we've got a few other enterprise funds to run through. The next one will be the airport fund. Within the airport fund, this one has a very sustainable revenue source coming in the form of long-term either land leases or aviation leases. You additionally have some fuel sales out there. What we have from a structural standpoint to watch, and we've been evaluating over the years, is there was a sale of land from the airport fund to the general fund a number of years ago. That is an annual transfer, a revenue source to this fund of $1.3 million. That will sunset though in 2024. That'll be fully repaid. Any new leases would be a key driver of additional revenue, but as I mentioned, it does have really stable leases that increase over time with inflation. So if we go forward one slide, we've got a panel here in the presentation that shows the cash flow dynamics over the next 10 years projected out. The key thing I mentioned is in the middle graphic there, which is the revenues versus expenditures. You can see the black line in the near term is higher than the orange line. That's cash coming in. And that's substantially due to that transfer coming in. In 2024, that gap closes. As that transfer disappears, $1.3 million in revenue will no longer be coming from the general fund into this particular enterprise fund. But what this shows is long-term, we don't have any worries with the airport fund. This is in a very sustainable situation. They can fund capital over the entire projection period that we are showing right now. So let's move on to the next one.
Good job, Rufus, Mayor. He's working hard.
Yeah,
It's a good thing because he pays for our lunches.
Exactly.
perfect. So we'll go to a special revenue fund next, which is the building fund. A couple key dynamics here. And so we continue to monitor the fees and they are periodically adjusted. They were adjusted just in a short while ago, as well as potentially scaling costs or reducing resources. So we're really trying to balance the activity going on within the community to the resources that are deployed in this fund over time. One of the other key dynamics here that's not present in the other analyses is there is a House bill, some legislation that puts in effectively a cap of how much money you can keep in the building fund. So one of the key components here is trying to maintain those fund balances and not exceeding that cap. That cap is the average of operating budgets for the previous 4 fiscal years. Additionally, we've included in 2020 the transfer of building ownership from the general fund and a purchase of land from the sanitation fund, which would use $2 million of operating reserves. Additionally, joint governmental facility has been included at $200,000 beginning in 2026 for the building fund. And so what this shows in the next slide is a graphic, again, looking at the sustainability over time. What we have shown up top is that over time, you'd need likely periodic adjustments in the fee, and there would be a fee study that would typically accompany that would look at your expenditures and your revenues. What we're showing currently going out every 3 years is an adjustment. The first one is in 2023 there for 25% in the permits, 20% in 26, and then 20% in 29. There's really, in my mind, 2 ways to solve this equation. If your activity is continuing to going and you need to increase the rates, it would be a permit fee increase. Or potentially if the activities were scaled back, you would scale back potentially some expenditures. If to say you went into a recessionary period and you didn't have a lot of building activity and there was some room to scale back. But what this would show is with those periodic adjustments, this fund would be sustainable over time.
What's happening with all the profit in the previous years that cannot be applied towards the deficit in the subsequent years?
So you're getting to the fund balances, the ending fund balances?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what this is showing is over time right now, expenditures are projected to increase in this fund. We also mentioned there were those one-time purchases like the purchase of land from the sanitation fund. So it's pulling down the balances. In the projection, we're trying to keep them below that orange line that's on the year-end fund balance graph. That's the statutory maximum. And so what we're showing is that your balances will be sustainable. They won't grow over this time period effectively with these increases.
That's a hike. 5%
Yes.
is a lot of money.
And basically, I think the way to think about this is again, kind of taking the crystal ball and applying your expenditures going forward. There will be a study every so often that would determine your revenues and expenditures and exactly where those fees would need to be. That was just done a year or so ago or 2 years ago at this point. But this is very dependent on the level of kind of activity that's going on in the community. So the next one we'll cover is the parking fund. And within the parking fund, a couple really key observations. So this particular fund saw a lot of volatility from the pandemic. As traffic stopped downtown on the beaches, we saw a big revenue decrease in that time period, as well as I believe there was a cap in place for a number of months on the maximum amount a parker could be charged. So what we're expecting in here is that revenues will normalize over the next year, and they will be sufficient over the short term based on the rate increases and structure change that were implemented last year. So in the middle of the pandemic, we had also a structure change within this. So one of the key things here that we'll be looking for is a really good year of data. So we really want to be able to go forward and see a normal year of parking with that new parking modernized structure in place so that we could correctly project out the revenues. We've worked with staff really closely to understand the really quick changes that have happened as the community's reopened, and we've seen parking activity increase, and we're right now projecting and estimating what we think the revenue levels will be going forward. But we really need some more data to really process this over the next few years. Additionally, we've included 1.3 million in ongoing costs for the joint governmental facility in 2026. We also added in the federal courthouse parking garage, which would be built in the future and operational in fiscal year 2026. It's about $140,000 of net revenue, so it adds to the fund. And then also in the CIP, we do have some R&R funding in 2021 and forward. There is a lot of needs out there to invest in existing assets, so that's included within.
I'm sorry, the federal courthouse garage,
Yes.
how does that impact us?
So it's our understanding that there will be a federal courthouse garage that will be inside the parking utility, our parking enterprise fund in the near term. You would construct it and operate it for a term and then turn it back over. And so it would actually add some revenues to the parking enterprise fund in the near term.
And Commissioner, I can give you a little more detail too.
Yeah, please, because this just hit me like a ton of bricks in the head.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're gonna like it, but
I know, I think I'm gonna like it, but when it hits me in the head
Right.
and I don't know about it, I don't like it.
Yeah, sure. So as we've been working with GSA on the federal courthouse site and looking at possibilities, as they zeroed in on this site south of the river, one of the limitations is surrounding parking, there not being any. And so GSA said, you know, we've got to figure out a way to have parking here. And so as we kind of had these discussions, one of the options that bubbled up was maybe we as a city could build the parking deck to provide parking, but then profit from it by drawing revenues through it.
So we're gonna build a
To-
garage for the federal courthouse. Okay.
That's a possibility. Yep, what we're looking at, and ultimately being, as it shows, kind of revenue positive. And Chris will better be able.
And we had this discussion as a commission, right?
No, it's just part of, it's just been conversation right now.
Yeah, but it's part of the conversation,
possibilities.
but it's inserted in a budget setting. So to
2020.
me, what's thrown out is like what we either need to get from the recommendation of this board, or it's what we're giving input as a commission. And I give lots of input individually as well. And not to take anything from Commissioner Sorensen, but when you hit me in the head with a federal courthouse,
Well, it
that's not a
probably
city.
should,
That's not a city.
it probably shouldn't even been put here. So
Yeah.
it's really, that's a.
And not that I wouldn't explore this. I mean, every opportunity to bring additional revenue to the city, I like, but I just like to know what I'm walking into.
Absolutely.
You're right. I mean, I don't know why this is here, but anyway. Right now. we're
Chris,
really-
did I do that justice? or-
Yeah, so there was talk that, GSA was going to have to hire somebody to provide parking, whether that was ASTA or any other parking company out there. One of the concepts we threw at them was, to the extent that we can guarantee a return, and that, it in a pro forma works so that it's a profitable endeavor for the parking fund to engage in. That we just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose a seat at that table, that as they were deciding who they went with, we might be an option if it makes financial sense.
Okay. But we'll come back and have a discussion.
Oh, of course.
I just want to echo something that Commissioner McKenzie is saying, because, it's making me think there were certain projects that we do discuss as a commission. I'm thinking right now about Bahia Mar and how many times I get asked for updates on Bahia Mar all the time. What's going on with Bahia Mar? What's going on with Bahia Mar? Well, I think if any of us are having conversations with anyone, whether it's the GSA, whether it's the courthouse, whatever, we are all entitled to know what's going on in real time, as opposed to just finding this out right now. Or else don't ask me what's going on with Bahia Mar.
Well, with regard to Bahia Mar, you know that we're having a workshop, right?
Yeah, I think
My point exactly.
that's his point.
My
Yeah.
point. That's my point.
I just came from, before I came here, I came from a meeting which they were discussing potential designs for the courthouse. And that would have been the first time the idea of a parking structure built by the city was really presented in a formal fashion. So I guess,
Yeah, but I think what we're saying, Mayor, and not trying to dismiss what you're saying, when the thought became a thought, it should have been a talk, and then we go back to my definition of consensus, and then whoever is the person we point, like you've been courthouse as long as I can remember, you move forward, and if Ben wanted to chime in with the parking garage, I mean, you give that task, or we say that's our person, and then we have a discussion, and we say go back and work out the details, and then go pitch this as a consensus from the full out of the commission.
so why don't we just take this item off because it really has nothing to do with today's.
But I don't really.
And we can address that at another time because it really is not really part of this discussion today. What's happening 5 years from now is really irrelevant.
But my point is, for it to have made this slide here, obviously there has been discussion going on. And this is to get onto this slide. Obviously, what is all that discussion that's happened with us doing a garage here? And that we even know what our projected revenues are when most of us are clueless when it comes to this entire issue. We shouldn't be clueless.
Well, this is the first time I've heard this myself.
Well, there you go.
So let me see if I can help clear it up, maybe some, because these are the types of things that get brought to us as a staff. And, what we looked at it from the first perspective was, would it make money? Because if it didn't make money, we wouldn't even continue the conversation. So Ben and his group did a quick pro forma to say, yes, in fact, we think that there would be an opportunity for us to profit from this type of a project, whether or not it should be part of a budget presentation or not. But it is something that we're just looking at and studying because there's going to be a need next to a federal building for parking. They only build parking when they build federal buildings, like 50 spaces for judges. And so they rely upon other parking in the area for any of their facilities. So that's why you don't see a big parking deck with the building right across the street. We just simply wanted to be at the table that if there's an opportunity to make money, that we don't get overlooked. And so that's.
Let me go a step further. The garage you pointed out across the street for judges for the county facility. Unless I fell asleep at a meeting, we still haven't figured out how to make that garage public and accessible to judges at the same time because they can't share a common area with civilians. So while you're doing your studies, I'm sure federal judges have more reasons to be afraid of security breaches. And we're going to build a garage for the federal courthouse for these folks and going to profit from them parking or public parking?
No, this would be public parking.
But have we looked at that piece? Because no one looked at that piece, remember, Mayor, until it hit us in the head and we couldn't use that parking garage, remember?
I remember that. And not only that, but the location of the existing courthouse, the old courthouse, was supposed to have been torn down by now.
Mhm.
It was supposed to have built a parking structure for the judges as a secured parking space, and absolutely zero has been done.
Right.
And I think that I'm happy that Chris has explored the opportunity,
Yeah, it
but I
helps us.
thought it would have been premature to come to the commission because it's really just in the discussion phase. If he felt that the federal courthouse wanted us to do it, then he would come to us and say, is this something we want to do? I don't think it's gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
So, or maybe it did just as of today. So I think it merits discussion. I think we could put it on another conference. We could put it on a conference agenda item, and we can give Chris direction with regard to that item. So your point is well taken.
May I ask who the group is, though? You just said the group. What group is working on this exactly?
The federal courthouse working group that's been doing this for about 5 or 6
So he said a
He
name.
said Ben and his group.
Transportation and mobility.
Okay.
People that
Rogers.
manage our parking.
Ben
Great.
Rogers.
Right. No, I know. So can we
Okay.
get, that kind of update or just
Yeah.
report about it?
Sure, absolutely.
That'd be great. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. As I said,
Nor am I.
I just would like us to all know about it as a group. That's all. Thanks.
Please proceed.
Perfect. So with the parking panel we've got up here, what we're currently showing is that with the fee increases that you did last year, the modernization of the structure, and our best estimates as things have reopened and revenue has come back to normal levels, is that this fund will have sustainable revenues going forward that will provide for the operating expenditures and capital. And right now, we're not showing up at the top a future year rate increases. And the one caveat I'll say with that is we're working with really limited information, right? So as we get a full fiscal year that has normal kind of parking trends in it with the new modern rate structure, we'll really need to be able to incorporate that information on a go forward basis to really truly understand where these new revenue levels were out. So this is our just best estimate at this current place in time, but it does look promising in the fact that it's sustainable going forward. So next I'll go through the two utility funds. We've got a regional sewer fund. In the regional sewer fund, there are a number of large users. City of Fort Lauderdale makes up roughly 83% of it, though. It is fully funded by those large users, and there are agreements in place which dictates the rate and a true-up mechanism at the end of the year to ensure that the fund has the proper revenue levels. Oakland Park makes up 13%, and then you have Wilton Manors, Tarmac, and Davie that collectively make up an additional 4%. There are within the projections some additional borrowing that has been projected here. So overall with the utilities, water, sewer, regional, we've talked about $200 million every 5 years. We did the last one in fiscal year 2018. The next one would be coming up in 2023. We are anticipating that the regional fund would have $38 million of those proceeds to help fund infrastructure in 2023 and then $30 million in 2028. Now, one of the key things, I put a table down here in the bottom just so the renewal and replacement growth. And so each year the city does a study that anticipates the needs at the plant for renewal and investment. That particular expense, if you look down in 2017, went from 7.8 million. The current fiscal year, it's 15.3. So it's grown about 100%. It's one of the larger drivers of expenditures within this fund and the need that has precipitated some rate increases that ultimately come back to the water and sewer fund. Go forward, this is the panel for the Central Regional Fund. As I mentioned, there's a contractual agreement in place. And so effectively, this fund has a calculation each year that dictates that rate per 1,000 gallons of wastewater that's delivered to the plant. What we are showing here in the near term is some slight increases. It fluctuates in every year given the capital investment needs. The long-term picture here over the next 10 years is roughly a 2.5% increase when you kind of average that out over the time period. And again, this will impact your other water and sewer fund. It is an expense to that particular fund. So if we go to the next one, talk about water and sewer, and we'll open up a model. So in the water and sewer fund, a couple key observations. We are targeting 3 months of operations and maintenance reserves. That's the amount of cash we want to have on hand at the end of a fiscal year that allows us to have liquidity and some rainy day money at the end of the year for things that happen unanticipated. Additionally, capital investments. So we're funding capital investments through two mechanisms. We're targeting in each and every year $20 million of cash from rates going toward infrastructure. And then additionally, when we do that larger bond issuance, the water and sewer fund in 2023, we're anticipating we'll get $162 million proceeds toward additional capital projects. And then again, 5 years later, we're anticipating $170 million in fiscal year 2028. And that's kind of consistent with, again, that historical precedent going back to 2018 of doing large bond issuance every so often in order to accelerate the capital plan. We also have included joint governmental facility at $1.5 million for this fund in 2026. And then also you've done some debt refinancing. So that's going to save some expenditures, about $500,000 in fiscal year 22 and forward. And Jacob, if you would, let's pull up the water model real quick. What I'd like to do is just run through a key scenario here in this particular fund with regards to the water plant. So up on the screen now, I've got the live model. And in this particular case, just to orient the model, we've got the baseline in here. And so what this includes within the model is a 5% overall increase each and every year going forward, which is 3.6% on water, 7% on sewer. What this shows is this will sustainably fund the enterprise, the utility going forward. So the revenues are matching your expenditures. It allows you to do the cash funding of capital we mentioned, as well as take on those two additional debt borrowings in fiscal year 2023 and 28 to accelerate capital. One other thing I failed to mention on the last slide as we switched over, we've also included in here the AMI program, which stands for the Advanced Metering Infrastructure. This would be the replacement of meters throughout the city. That is in 2022. So that's that other little red bar we see in the capital plan down below. Now, one of the key scenarios that we need to run in here is the addition of a new water plant. And so what I'll have Jacob do is go in and toggle in the water plant, the expenditures for this plant. The current estimate we have for that is $432 million in capital costs. We are putting that in fiscal year 2026. So it's a number of years in the future. But what this shows is if we put that amount of borrowing in kind of a conventional way where you would design and build it and borrow for it, the rate increases at an overall level of 5% will not be sustainable. So when that new debt service comes online in 2026, if you scroll over the operating fund balances, Jacob, what you can see there is we're sustainable. We're on the black line. When that new debt service comes on, though, our fund balances deplete very, very quickly. So the revenues are not at a level where they can support that new debt service. It's also shown up above in kind of the red you see in the table before we see the coverage is not sufficient. So we really fundamentally could not borrow that amount of money with our current revenue levels. So one way to look at this, Jacob, if you will unhide our overrides, is there's two ways to tackle that. So you can continue to do rate increases like you're doing. And if you unhide real quick in 2026 or just unlock 2026 within the model on the water side, what you could do is wait till the debt service comes on and we could do an increase at that particular point in time. He's going to calculate that through and this model is going to solve for what level of increase we need in that particular year. Now that's a pretty significant amount of debt service. Additionally, there are some operating costs in there as well, about $16.7 million associated with the new plant. So what that would show is if you waited till that time, it would be about a 28% increase in fiscal year 2026. And you can see right after that in 2027, we also have some 10% increases. And so just to get the revenues in alignment, if we wait, we've got a pretty big jump to make sure that those revenues match that new expenditure requirement we have. So the other way to do this oftentimes, once you've made a decision on kind of that plan, would be to look at a plan that would pull the increases forward, recognizing we have a planning horizon where we have a number of years before this expenditure comes on. What we could do is increase the rate increases starting in fiscal year 22 through fiscal year 2026 to try to make a predictable increase that will allow us at that point in time when we have to borrow to have enough money to support the debt. And so Jacob, if you would increase that by 5%, what he's going to do is take the water increase instead of 3.6, it's going to put an additional 5% on top of it, which will bring it up to 8.6% each year. And what that will do is start to balance this model so that we can borrow in 2026 and have a sufficient amount of revenue. And so he's going to go ahead and calculate this through. And what that will do is in the near term, if you can just point to the operating fund balance, you're increasing your rates faster than your operating costs. You're going to build a little bit of fund balance. And then as we get to 2026, that borrowing happens. We can use some additional fund balance that we have above the minimum toward that borrowing, but we don't need another large rate increase at that point in time. It can kind of go back to the 5% overall increases going forward. And so this is just an update. I actually last year when we went through this showed a very similar outlook on this one. The increases have come up a little bit just with the current budget levels, but kind of very similar dynamics in what the rate increase would either need to be a large increase in the future when it happens or a smaller increase in the years preceding when that new water plant would need to be borrowed for.
Kyle,
Yes.
Can you also clarify that these would be rate increases as a rate increase on top of a rate increase? Unlike when we were talking about the ad valorem, if you went and added a 0.5 and then it was sustained, we're talking about an 8.6 and then an additional 8.6. So it's not a rate, it's a percentage. So this fund is one of the funds that, because of the fact that we need to be, moving forward with the new water plant, this is going to be one of those funds that needs a lot of discussion from you as the policy decision makers, because if we don't address and start to build up this fund balance, you're going to be looking at a 30% increase in 26. Different commission possibly, but you don't want to kick the can down the road.
Well, then good point, Brian. And that's assuming that we borrow. assuming that we go to the bond market, right? Am I tracking that right?
It is. This is
So-
kind of a conventional setup of how you would build a
Right.
water plant. Mhm.
Right. So alternatively, and maybe that's concept one where you're going to go to now. Is that
It's not, no.
okay? So alternatively, an option for funding it is what we're exploring, the idea of a public-private partnership.
It would be.
Right.
Mhm.
Chris,
Absolutely. But
That's what
as
we're
I've,
talking
as
about.
I've said, we have to be prepared to do it ourselves until we decide that we're going to go a different way. And so because doing it ourselves ramps into 2026, there's some addressing of that this year. I think we have to have that discussion now. Tonight, before you will be the approval of bringing on the owner's rep, which is for water plant, which we've talked about doing. And that's on tonight's agenda. So yeah, if we end up with going with one of the unsolicited proposals that is a negotiated rate for take or pay based upon a volumetric calculation, then this modeling probably changes. But this
Exactly.
is the modeling as though you say, nothing that's come in the door we like. We know we need a water plant. Chris, go build a water plant. This is the way this is the path to do that.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question, if I may, Mayor.
Yes.
Probably John Herbst. And Brian just really brought this to my attention. So like you said, it'd be 8.6 on top of 8.6, right? So our current structure to pay back our borrowing in reference to water, is that the same way that we're doing this 5% each year that we assess?
Yes.
So this is why I bring it up each and every year.
Each
It's
year.
my 7th and a half year bringing it up again. And it's interesting it came out because here too, we go out to talk about this tax bill and these assessments and all the stuff that we do during the year. And we got into the same hairy gray area doing the stormwater when we reconfigured how we were going to do that. And your taxes don't go, but we're really passing on a lot of other assessments as we improve our infrastructure. We get what we're trying to do and what we need to do, but that's a lot of layering of assessments. And even if we go P3, we're still going to turn around and look at the same scenario, in my opinion, as the joint commission. And we're talking about $9 million a year, where we have to find that money. And this plant, because they're going to improve it with their funds, doesn't mean we're not going to have to pay to rent or be assessed annually for the payback.
So Commissioner, the current rate increases that we have are there to support existing debt service,
Right.
existing operational costs, and didn't contemplate, obviously, in advance, building up a huge pot of money for the construction of an eventual
Right.
new water plant. So anything we have above and beyond what is built into our current rate structure is geared towards that. The only thing I'll say about the P3 versus the self-constructed is it's, and I'm going to use round numbers, a $400 million plant.
Right.
Whether it's done through a P3 or whether we construct it ourselves, we're still paying for it over 30 years, whether we pay for it as a 30-year bond or whether we pay for it over 30 years of take and pay with the P3 vendor that we may choose. Either way, the cost is going to be the same, more or less. I mean, obviously.
And that's what I think the three of us are saying.
Yeah.
Right.
And
There's no
because
difference.
And because of the fact that this fund is not tied to your tax bill, so it's
No, it's
not part of
separate.
our ad valorem
Yeah.
discussion. This
Yeah.
is a user rate fee structure.
Right.
So either way, we just need to make sure that we're aware of that and we anticipate either position. And our position as BAB would be that you don't wait to start on those rate increases if we
Do it
know
now.
we're going to be doing it.
Okay. But thank you for pointing that out. You just helped me sleep a little longer.
But your point is well taken. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of projects we're involved with, and there's a lot of layering. You're right. But we're investing for the future.
Oh yeah.
And it's built up like this because we didn't do this in the past. So we're here to bite the bullet, I guess. And we're all taxpayers here in our city, and we're all ratepayers here in our city. And these are choices we're going to make at some point as to which go forward, which don't. and everything has a big price tag. But a water plant,
That's true.
we've discussed.
Right.
Stormwater projects, we've discussed. So nothing is going to hit you. So
Again.
Yeah. We're going to
For the
discuss
third
everything.
time.
But it's funny that you say that. I mean, I appreciate that, but I'm with the new commission, but I was here also with the previous commission.
As was I.
And we weren't talking about, at least collectively, we weren't talking about a new plan. You've been talking about that since I've been working with you. And it's interesting when you look back how long we've held this rate. And now you're right. There's going to be a lot of heavy lifting, and I'm going to participate in these discussions and hopefully some of the votes to put the city in a better position. But at the same time, the reason why I'm just making these points is so that the public is well educated, so that because I've always voted against any assessments. Not so much that I didn't want to pay for what we borrowed, is passing on another assessment to the consumer is where my concerns are. But I'm well understanding of what we have to do for this aging infrastructure that dates back, at least 50 something years, where we didn't have a plan in place to address it. We're no different than any other older city that has this problem. Some of the newer cities don't have this problem now, but now that we've discovered it, exposed it, I'm looking for the best way to do it and not burden the resident too heavily with it. So that's what I'm looking for.
So the good thing is that we have there's a lot of interest in people coming to our city. And as Brian said, we had $1.1 billion worth of new real estate added to our tax rolls this past year. And not that it will continue at that rate, but it's still trending in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are going to continue to authorize the building of new buildings, we've got to make sure that our infrastructure is there to meet the demand. We've always said that. So whether it be in the downtown, whether it be on the beach, wherever it may be. So those decisions we've already made, to allow buildings to be built. You see them at this commission, the previous commission. Now we've got to make those decisions that complete the process. And you know what? We're building a city here. It's exciting. People are coming here because they see an exciting city. And it's not sexy to talk about sewer pipes, but if we don't,
Sure it is. Got to put on the right
It's
outfit.
not hitting you in the head.
It depends who you're talking to.
if we
You
don't,
got to be more revealing.
if we don't, continue this process that we started 2 years ago, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot, and we're going to be finding ourselves like unfortunately, some other cities that fail to invest in their public works. So at some point, it will come to an end. We will have completed our projects, and we'll be a better city for it. And I think we'll be able to sustain the growth that we're seeing and welcoming here in our city. So you're right. These water rates are regressive. The person who lives in a $100,000 house pays the same water rate as the person that lives in $1 million house. So because water is water. So but sometimes people can only afford so much, and it becomes a larger percentage of their income. And I fully understand that. But anyway, we don't have that much time left. Can we wrap this up soon?
I absolutely will. I'll go right through it. Okay, so 2 more to go through. I'll go through quick. Let's see. So we've got the stormwater fund. And within the stormwater fund, just a couple key observations. So last year was the year that a non-ad valorem assessment was implemented.
Go to the previous slide.
Yes, sure.
You think a leaf blower pushed that?
So if we
Yeah.
So we implemented a non-ad valorem assessment, or the city did in FY21. That is supporting a stormwater bond of $200 million. There's some good news associated with that. The city did apply for a WIFIA loan, which is very close to being finalized, as I understand it, which will save some money on interest payments on that particular loan. We're also projecting in fiscal year 2027 an additional $200 million. So much like the water fund, we've got planned within our models additional borrowing happening within the future. We've got some assumed interim financing right now to begin projects early while the financing is finalized. We've also added in some operational costs. So as you add to the system, there is an expectation that O&M costs will increase with time. We've added in approximately $850,000 every time you borrow $200 million to make sure we're accounting for that. That'll true up as the budgets get changed each year or updated. We've also added $100,000 in for the joint governmental facility, and we're targeting cash funded capital from rates of $4 million annually. So if we go to the panel on this particular one, the stormwater fund right now is in a very sustainable position. As I mentioned, though, in the near term right now, we've got some things to finalize. So the financing has to be finalized on this one. The assessment is performing and providing the correct amount of revenue. And so with the plan we've developed up top that we're showing right now shows a recommended 0% increase in the assessment next year or this year, fiscal year 2022, as everything is finalized with the financing. And then going forward, if we're going to plan for an additional borrowing in the future, we can do a 5% increase every year from 23 forward. And that will provide enough revenue such that we could borrow for that additional $200 million to do the next set of priority capital investments in neighborhoods. And that would avoid a situation, much like we just talked about, with a large assessment shock or a large increase in 1 year. So trying to figure out what that optimal plan would be of a year over year increase to get us there with a predictable level of increases for customers. If we move on, let's go to our final fund, sanitation fund. So a couple key observations. There's a 4% increase in sanitation rates that's included in the ordinance through fiscal year 2024. There's a sale of the land from the building fund, about $2 million in proceeds coming into this enterprise in 2021. Hauler contracts, this is a key one we'll be watching next year, will include some negotiations in fiscal year 2023. And so depending on those negotiations, there might be differences in the expenditures going forward for this particular fund. Reserve target is 1.5 months. Currently, the city's target is to bring this up to 3 months over time. Included additionally $100,000 in joint governmental center costs in 2026, and also $900,000 for Plant A remediation costs that is subject to the sale of the Plant A property. So the panel screenshot of this particular one shows that with those 4% increases that are currently within the ordinance to 2024, we've shown a continuation of that going forward throughout the next 10 years. What that would show is within this particular enterprise, a 4% would be sustainable going forward, and you would have balances in each year. The balances will be a little bit lower than the desired target, but we do show them coming back up in the long term as those 4% provide enough revenue. The real key here will again be in 2023 as those negotiations happen with the hauler contracts, if there's any particular changes to the underlying expenditures that we're currently projecting out. So with that, I'll end. That's our last fund to take. And if there's any questions, I appreciate your time and thoughts.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It's been very helpful.
Thank you.
I mean, obviously, just keep in mind, folks, that these are just budget projections. They have nothing to do with policy decisions that this commission can make with regard to cutting expenses, should we decide to go in that direction. But those are decisions we'll have to address down the road and years ahead. So any member of the advisory board have any questions of Stantec?
When I do,
Of course.
we know that part of we know that there is a difference between the market value and the taxable value from long-term residents in the city. I know particularly in my neighborhood, we've had 16 sales out of 144 homes since the first year. Some of those were long-term residents that are cashing in on the market. So for example, there's a home that one of my neighbors was only paying $4,000 a year. She's had to save a home at $200,000. She sold it for 1.2. They're going to bulldoze. So I know that they're going to have a big increase. And that's part of our increase that we've been sustaining through the amount of sales. Do you have an idea for the city of Fort Lauderdale, or could you get back to us? What's the difference between our market value and tax value? So that you do? You can get it? Okay, because I think that if we're looking at part of our projections on what amount, we know what amount our new construction has been, and then what our value's been increasing. But the values, because of so many of our residents have saved the home, I'm skeptical of some of these projections at 7% and 8% if the new construction starts to taper off, because so many people have a cap of that 3% or 2.6.
Right, but I don't see that happening.
No, but if we had an idea of, it's just another way of looking at it to make our projections maybe more accurate, was how many, every time a person leaves the city or is reselling, how much more money are we getting? And maybe that will help us do a better job of projecting.
It's probably more incremental. I mean, in my neighborhood, which is not as fashionable as Rio Vista, we see, new construction everywhere, every neighborhood. I don't know of one neighborhood where we haven't seen new construction.
But even if it's not new construction, it's just a changeover of the new owner.
Exactly.
Because, there's
Even
a
if we
big jump.
capture that 1 year.
Yeah. But then
Okay.
it goes, okay.
Any member of the commission, Vice Mayor, do you have any questions? She has
I
a
do.
text.
Yeah, I do not. Thank you. I'm just listening. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Commissioner Glassman, District 2?
Thank you very much, Mayor. By the way, thank you guys so much. This question is mostly for Chris when he gave his little report, but thank you so much. I really appreciate your work in Budget Advisory Board. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, Brian, and the entire board. It's just incredible and so helpful to all of us throughout this process. Chris, really quickly, you had mentioned, help me if I made a mistake in listening to what you said, but you said 2 crosswalks on Las Olas for 300,000. I always thought it was 1, but I think you said 2.
I did say 2.
So it is 2 for the 300.
That's correct.
Okay, because all of the discussions that we've had so far, when I've been meeting with the Las Olas folks, and I thought with Ben Rogers was that we were starting with the 1 somewhere around.
He's budgeting for 2.
I understand. So the 300,000 though would handle 2 if we decide to go with 2 right away. Okay, good. That's news to me, so I'm happy to hear it, and I just wanted to make sure that I had that correct. So thank you for that. On the American Recovery Plan Act Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, attachment 4, page 1 of 2. Help me explain why we are going to pay $500,000 for the McNabb Bridge project contribution. That bridge is in Pompano Beach.
Yeah, so we were approached by the city of Pompano Beach to find out if we had any interest in participating. There's a project that is a bridge replacement up on McNabb Road. If we participate, what would happen is the bridge would actually be built at a 3-foot higher level than it exists today, which would impact several of our neighborhoods up there and allow some of our homes in Fort Lauderdale to have access to deeper water by raising this fixed bridge higher than it's been and higher than it is today. So it does impact, this project directly impacts some of our residents in Commission District 1.
And have we had that kind of clamoring from
Yes,
neighborhoods
yes,
saying,
yes.
please? The bridge?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Commissioner Vice
Thank you.
Mayor.
And Steve, I believe we voted on this already, didn't we, Chris? The allocation of the 500,000, and then now we're just waiting for the interlocal agreement with Pompano.
We've discussed it. I don't know if we've taken an official
I think
vote.
we voted at some point, or I could be wrong, but we can pull that up. And I think maybe you're putting it in the budget now, but I believe the commission has discussed this. I'll go back and look at my notes, but yes, thank you. Steve, we've been talking about this for a couple of years, Imperial Point in particular, and McNabb, that bridge, like Chris said, if we raise it 3 feet, they are contributing most of the dollars for that project. But since there is some benefit for Imperial Point and other neighborhoods, really, that we discussed it at a commission meeting at some point, and we can find that too.
Okay, great. I guess I just don't remember us discussing contributing $500,000 to Pompano Beach. I think I would have remembered that, but Chris, you think we voted? We didn't vote on that, or we'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's find out, and I'll look at my notes too. So thanks.
Thank you. So Chris, you had mentioned some phraseology earlier when you said, give something to get something. So the reason I'm also bringing this up is I would love us to have that conversation with Pompano Beach. When you say give something to get something, perhaps they could consider contributing to the homeless initiative that we do every year. And we never get any help from any other cities in the county with any of the work that we do with our homeless initiatives. So I would love for you to have that discussion with their city manager
keep in mind that they have their own homeless challenges. You know, we're not the only one that has them. So, you know, if we're looking for assistance, I would look to some of the Western cities more so than Hollywood or Pompano, because honestly, they have their own challenges.
Okay,
So,
I just know that whenever we have our meetings with folks on any homelessness issues, we never hear about any cities contributing to any of the initiatives or working with any of the, like the United Way or with the county and us. And I'm just saying,
disputing that.
okay, anyway, I'm just saying I was surprised. I forgive me if I just didn't remember that we had agreed to give $500,000 for the bridge project. But thanks for clarifying that. Then that might be,
Is that it? Come on, we have to move along because we have another meeting that we have to have a break before we go. So, so
okay,
please try to get through your notes.
okay,
Okay.
I'm doing it,
Come on.
but well, if you keep interrupting and keep telling me to come on, maybe I'll just take a little longer.
Okay. Thank you.
We're wasting time just by you telling me to come on. So, okay, so Chris, on the page with the not-for-profit grant participation agreement funding, so we're still roughly now, according to my math, about $500,000 less than we usually give, right?
It is less than we have historically had over the past couple of years. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, do you think there's room maybe to do something more or other groups, or maybe we can look at that list again, or anybody else that has applied? Maybe we could just take a second look, or maybe we could bump some up. I'm thinking, I see Stranahan House at 100,000. Maybe we could even increase the Historical Society from 85 to 100, so it's matched, it's even. And then maybe if we can look at the list of people that did apply, if we decide as a commission, because we, as I said, we are about $500,000 less than typical.
Yeah, that certainly would be at the pleasure of the commission. You know, what we took in the preliminary budget was what the Budget Advisory Board recommended, and the couple that I had heard the commission talk about. But if the commission wants to do none of them or more than what's proposed, that's certainly your prerogative.
Okay, so maybe if we can just get a quick look at that list again of everyone that applied, and now that we know that we have that leeway and we have a little time, so we could talk about it on July 6th. Thank you. That's it for me, Mayor.
Can I chime in on that piece? Because my understanding, and maybe Brian can help me, was the recommendation from the board that we shouldn't be in the business of funding nonprofits with taxpayers' dollars. That's how we got here. Am I correct?
Well,
It was something like that,
it was
right?
it was a combination. I think that in the past years, it was not a more open process, and that the $2.2 million is traditionally had been allocated from general fund was going to only certain groups. And we wanted to make sure that it became an open forum for other organizations to submit. So this was our first time, but we were also, when we were going through this and scoring this in January, February, March, it was before the additional new information of federal funding. It was before the additional number of dollars that were being given by the property appraiser, because we were going over preliminaries that were not to the number that we were. And we were trying to be fiscally responsible in relationship to suggesting to cut, which is the bulk of general fund, which is services or payroll.
Right.
So we didn't want to touch those budgets. And we were looking at the fact that when we looked at your initiatives and your goals, there were a lot of these organizations that were not tying directly to your goals. And it was really taking your direction at the beginning of this and saying, we want to make sure that you are tied to our initiatives. And one of your major initiatives is CIP, which is what I want to address when I have my chance to recap at the end. So it was a combination of a lot of things.
Right.
And we scored and we did it. But we also know that, you know, you have discretion, and we know that there were organizations that may have been submitted that are really, as Chris mentioned, part of a
matching.
or it's part of what we need to do as a city. Like there's conversations, should we be spending money on a band for 4th of July? Well, some taxpayers may say that's not a good use of taxpayer money. But when you put on your big city hat and you say, okay, what do we need to do as a city and enhance cultural aspects, and what do we give back to the taxpayer? You could argue that here nor there, but it's a decision that needs to be made. And that was the ones that we felt we scored them based upon what we felt were the best use of taxpayer money that also tied directly to your initiatives. And then leaving you discretion to massage that with the city manager.
Right. And then the city manager came back and used the discretion and added more. So what I'm
I don't
saying
know
is,
if we can say that there's always 2.2 million because.
Right. And
but
then
it's up to you.
we've tried to cast the net to make sure everyone had an opportunity. But to me, I don't have my, hold on a second. To me, looks like we caught the same fish.
No, there were 14 new organizations.
In terms of the real dollars, there's some new ones came in, but nothing of significance.
Well, we wouldn't want to increase. And
No, never wanted to increase. I'm just giving a snapshot of all this stuff I've been, trying to break down. Because when we initially went down this road, we were saying we
were conservative with our number, and we tried to stay under $1 million, which is what we gave to the city manager.
And then when we give historical data, as the city manager mentioned, to me, historical data is more than 2 years. I think we, in the last couple of years, did a lot of stuff for the homeless, that drove a big number that historically wasn't there in an immediate effort to do something across the street. But historically, we've given to the HAC, historically, we've given to United Way, historically, we've given to other organizations dealing with homes. We did a deeper dive. So as we started to peel back the onion, I was just hoping we could, capture something a little more different than what we have been doing. And I saw some folks that applied, they got 0, but I don't do those assessments. I'm just looking at the outcome. I just wanted to share that information.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Robert?
I'm good.
Okay. Commissioner Sorensen?
Nope, nothing. Thank you. Budget Advisory
You
Board.
want to wrap this up?
Yes. Okay. So really today's meeting was to focus on the 3 items that you are going to be discussing on July 6th for the tax trim notice. So the BAB voting unanimously to support the city manager proposal of a 0 ad valorem, given the fact
Zero
that
increase in
ad valorem rate for the 2022 budget based upon the federal funding, and using those very smartly to apply to CIP projects that were moved out, that moved up, because those are one-time revenues. So we supported that. We also support the fact that the fire assessment doing the true up the 3rd year, which would be 2023. So there should be no reason to increase that this year. And then the stormwater rate went up last year. And as you saw from the Stantec, we'll be needing to relook at that in the near future at possibly a 5% increase. But for 2022, we don't have that as an issue. There were a couple of things that I just wanted to very quickly. So I'm going to skip half of my notes and just say that I think that as a city, this board over the last couple of years have really been challenging back to all the department heads of how can we work smarter, how can we work more efficiently. And to that degree, I want to commend the city manager in his recommendations that he's put in there with the additional computer systems upgrades that each of the department heads had come before BAB. I think that in the past, where a lot of sound bites are about our infrastructure has been really on water and sewer, but there's a whole infrastructure on IT. And we're starting to get that more up and running. So I think that that has been a positive thing. I think that the funding for the additional police and fire equipment that they've requested for is being funded And we acknowledge that and appreciate that. We had challenged the city manager in a year where we were trying to make sure that we did not add any FTEs to participate in the real-time crime center. And I appreciate Chris's looking at how to fill some of those positions for that new program in joint with the county. I was very pleased and surprised with the statistics of the new shot spotter system, which was in the 2021. I think that the city needs to continue to be on the more cutting edge when it comes to enforcement. So I would encourage the commission to continue to support the additional expansions of license plate readers, additional cameras, additional equipment to support our men and women in fire and in police. And I wanted to just mention again that we need to be looking at the next couple of years as to how we're going to be able to fund our CIP projects within the general fund. They have not been supported as much as I think they should be. And I think that as part of your discussion on ad valorem down the road of any type of an increase, maybe we should be putting that aside so that when we're having public discussions about lossless mobility, when we're talking about additional crosswalks, when we're talking about bridges, when we're talking about all these other things, we have some idea as to how we're going to fund those. Because currently, when our revenues are being outpaced, even with this increase of all of the additional tax roll, if we didn't have the federal funding this year, our revenues were under our obligations to payroll and benefits. You can't continue to do all your CIP projects if every year the tax rate increase or the new revenue that is coming in from the tax assessor from all of these higher values is less than what we're paying out on our contractual obligations. So we need to look at our ad valorem increases, and we need to maybe set those aside for CIPs so that those projects don't keep getting cut. And I think that the taxpayers would be able to, just as they did with your parks bond and our police bond, if they know that it's going for something that is tangible, like crosswalks or streetscapes and CIP projects, and moving up the seawall projects and the other things that everybody's been complaining about, and making sure that we're resilient, I think that you're going to get the support. So that would be my suggestion. And the one last thing that I wanted to bring up was the other night, Bab was surprised when we were looking over the list. It was the first time that came up, possibly doing President's Day and acknowledging that as a holiday. The cost of that is coming in at over $600,000. As we sat through each of, and I've shared this with the city manager that night, when looking at all of our departmental presentations that we went through, there were some departments that were not necessarily public safety departments that were asking for FTEs and additional staff. And we were saying, this is not the year to do additional payroll. So to spend $600,000 for a holiday when there are departments like IT, et cetera, or maybe neighborhood support or wherever, asking for additional staffing, that was a challenge that Bab was not as excited about adding to payroll if we have been doing not filling additional positions. And we would rather have additional positions than having a holiday. And then the same workload is sitting on their desk when they come back after that day off. So if we need help to some of our staff members in some of the departments, if there's money to do $600,000 in additional payroll, I think we should be looking at possible FTEs instead of a holiday.
Okay,
And that would conclude my presentation.
thank you, Brian. Chris, do you have any closing remarks?
No, not other than just to frame the discussion and say we're just looking for the direction on what we bring back for you on July the 6th to do the maximum millage rate. I think it's fairly clear that we'll bring back something that has the maximum millage rate at its current level of 4.1193. This will be back in front of you in August, and then 2 public hearings in September, some joint meetings with the Budget Advisory Board, as well as the process moves forward.
Okay.
That's all I
Laura,
have in
anything?
summary.
You're good? Okay, so we'll conclude this meeting, this workshop rather. Thank you all for participating. I'm going to begin the conference meeting and then take a recess for about 20 minutes. So at least we start on time. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the conference meeting of Fort Lauderdale City Commission this June 15th. We will now take a recess for about 20 minutes. Thank you.